Hi, everyone. Ian Hamilton with Good Virtual Reality here, joined by Sofia Lazaro, who is a co founder of Dauntless XR. Hello, Sophia. Why don't you tell us where we're tuning in from today?
Hey, Ian, thanks for having me. So, I am calling in from just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in a town called Roswell.
Why don't you tell me about what Dauntless XR does?
So, Dauntless XR builds AR, mixed reality, and some virtual reality, but primarily AR and MR applications for the deskless workforce. So, individuals who work in aerospace, manufacturing, and defense. And really aims at use cases to how can we use XR as a medium to give people the information they need when they need it in 3D in kind of a hands free format.
You mentioned that it's a different sort of entry point into the medium. Most people get in through gaming. And so I want to come back to your use case in a second, but I wanted to go back and understand how you got introduced to the medium in the first place.
Yeah, sure. It's that's always a an interesting story when you talk to people in XR is like, how did you find out about this in the first place? I was introduced honestly in like an on-campus activation. There was some type of event pop up where they were using an Oculus Rift on Georgia Tech's campus, and I got to try it out as a student. And I walked away from it thinking, this is going to be one of those technologies that changes the way people interact with technology in my lifetime, which was so interesting for me because so much of my degree at the time focused on that kind of that intersection between technology and public policy and technology in the economy. And we were all studying it from a historical perspective. And then to have that opportunity to see it from a kind of in real life, oh, this is a technology that's going to change in my lifetime was very exciting. And then I just kind of started taking every opportunity I could to get my hands on VR headsets until I purchased my own. So I did a VR escape room that I think was also using a Rift. I went to when I was based, after I left Atlanta, and I was based in Houston. The Houston Natural Museum of Science did a virtual reality exhibit where you could go try what at the time was all the state of the art headsets and experiences. And I mean, I remember each one I did. I remember that was my first time experiencing motion sickness in VR, which was kind of an interesting wake up call as to the limitations of the platform. But it was also the first time I walked away from it and just, it really impressed upon me how quickly you could forget that you were looking at digital objects versus
Hmm.
physical ones.
Yeah,
So yeah, from there I was hooked. And I think the first headset I purchased was the Google Daydream, actually.
interesting. Yeah. So we met each other at the Jigsaw convention I was at a little while ago, and I got to see some of those first time reactions where people kind of took the headset off and came back to reality for the first time, kind of an echo of what you just described. It gave me so much heart to see that still happening, and also to see the folks that didn't have the simulator sickness. There was a fair amount of like people that weren't fitted right to the headset, sort of going, "This is a little blurry," and I really, I got good at getting over there and being like, "Okay, well, press the headset up to your eyes. Now let me just ratchet up the back, and is that all better now?" And it's like, "Yep, that was exactly what was the problem with the blurriness on my Quest 3S." They just didn't get a good fitting from the get-go. But also then so there's these people that are walking around in mixed reality with their family members. They've got their eyes and mind focused on these digital objects that are floating in their space. And they're puzzling. They're just doing jigsaw puzzles in space around them. It's both similar in some ways to what you're doing and very far away from what you're doing at the same time. And I want to understand. So before we go on too much, when you use the label XR, it means that you're throwing out a net at all the types of headsets out there that are trying to unlock this space. And I see headsets like Magic Leap, like HoloLens that are kind of gone away at this point. That they're not really being manufactured, at least in the same way that they used to be. Very expensive devices with very limited fields of view and only focused on augmented reality. And then you have this new class of VR headset that is like the Apple Vision Pro or perhaps even the Vario at the super high end, many thousands of dollars, that merges AR on top of VR as this additional layer. And all of those headset designs have very wide field of view optics, so you get a lot of digital content in front of you at all times. You feel like you're present in that space. You can switch it to VR very quickly. I'd like to understand for your use cases, what headsets are you finding people gravitating towards, and which ones do you think they'll be using in the future?
Yeah, I think there's a stark dividing line through our use cases, and we build hardware agnostic specifically so that we can bring in the right hardware that's right for the use case. And for us, the hard line tends to be, is this a classroom or a field context? And if it's a classroom context, or maybe at least not a context where we're concerned about physical safety, so we don't have humans in the same space as large machinery or things like that, that is when we would lean more on the things that have the higher field of view, right? So the most common for us right now in that case would be the Vario or the Quest. Years ago, it would have been the HoloLens and the Magic Leap, which yes had more limited field of view, but had other things going for them that really helped us use them quite frequently. When we're talking about a field use case, this is when we start to go really, really lightweight. And this is why I use the term XR, because this is really where we get into what I think people like you and I who have a more detailed perception of where things hit on a medium, I think we would call this a heads up display. That's where I would put like the Vuzix, the RealWear, now the Arc 2. And so if we're talking about an environment where we have a technician climbing under an aircraft to do an inspection, I want them with something that is lightweight, that fits under their current safety gear, that they can flip in and out of their field of view. And I'm less concerned about immersing them, and I'm more concerned about giving them relevant reference material right when they need it. It doesn't have to be as much content. And so that's when we would lean on something like the Vuzix or the RealWear, which for people who are not familiar, they use more of a tiny screen that when you position it just right, it's like positioned kind of on a boom, the way a mic would be. When it's positioned just right, it stops looking like a tiny screen in your field of view, and it really does feel like it's a floating monitor in your field of view. It can take a little bit to get it in the exact right position for like your peripheral gaze, but when you get it right, it's kind of magic because you can look away from it and it's as if it's not there, and you can focus on what your hands are doing in real life, but then you can refocus off. For me, I tend to place it on the left, and then you can see what looks like a full-size monitor with the reference data that you may be using in that context.
Interesting. I love that. And I just came from a demo with Copen, display maker that is doing all sorts of different displays. And they had a medical HMD it was basically just a heads up display like you're describing, with the heads up display providing stereoscopic camera views inside of a human body.
Oh, wow.
And the doctor is basically able to keep an eye on the instruments and inside the body, even though they're occasionally looking away from time to time at other things to get an instrument or something. I still need to do some more reporting there to understand more of that project. But it was also sort of a wake up call for me to see exactly the same use case you're describing there, of the value of just a decent sized monitor in your space with not a lot of tracking involved, in not a lot of the cost involved necessarily of the larger HMDs that enclose you and keep you disconnected. So back to your business and your clients. I assume you can't share too many names of specific clients, but can you walk me through kind of a little bit more specifically, if you can, the sectors and the use cases where people might be using your software? What does your software do at the end of the day for the client?
Yeah. So our software kind of sits into two different classes. One that I would call like 3D data collaboration, and the other I would call workflow assistance. So with workflow assistance, the solution we built for that was Katana. And that was really inspired by my co-founder being a project controls engineer and having to drag like binders of reference materials out into the field and climb scaffolding and things like that. And just wishing she had something that was hands-free and digitally native rather than having to lug paper around. And there's some use cases we've done with Katana that I think people find interesting. I referenced the aircraft maintenance. So that was a project that we actually did with the US Air Force through a program called SBIR, or the Small Business Innovation and Research Development Program. And with that use case, we tested both in a classroom setting, walking a aircraft technician using a 3D model and then the guided instructions of what they needed to do. So first you do this, and then you do that. And then we also had them take it into the field. And that was all powered by Katana. And what we found most interesting there was one, the ability for them to be hands-free but still have the reference material. It is required. It doesn't matter how long you've been an aircraft technician. It doesn't matter how many times you've changed a tire on a KC. You have to have those instructions available to you and open to the correct steps while you are doing that work. Is we found it was most useful in what we called low frequency and high risk procedures. So changing a tire, the feedback was good. It was helpful for them to have that instead of something physical like a laptop or a binder underneath them. But where we got the most positive feedback was procedures like testing inflatable slide. Those can only be tested. They have to be tested a few times a year. But if you do it incorrectly and you actually deploy the slide, it grounds the plane, because those are single-use safety devices, and they have to be the plane has to be refitted with a new one. So you could accidentally ground an aircraft that then can't be used, which is not something that a maintenance tech ever wants to
That's
do
a
unless they
very
have to.
very costly mistake. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was one example of how Katana was used for the Air Force on the data visualization side, and that's where we have a solution called Aura, where the main concept behind that is that 3D data, when it's being used for decision making, is best viewed in 3D. So it's an underlying platform that assumes that we have 3D assets, but that those assets also have time and have other aspects to how we would analyze them. One project we did on that platform was actually with NASA, where we brought in basically a 2-scale digital twin of the inner solar system and all of the satellites that NASA uses to track solar weather, particularly solar flares and CMEs. And what we were looking to do there was to see, can we improve the analysis that is occurring when they're looking at sensor data coming from satellites, if they can look at that data in the context of where that satellite was positioned and when in relation to Earth and the sun, when it captured that data. And we have that was a really interesting one. We were actually able to spin out kind of a free educational tool that's available on MetaQuest if anyone wants to check it out, where you can explore some like solar imagery coming from those satellites and see a version of that inner
What's
solar
that called?
system. It's called Aura Space Weather Data Explorer.
How do you spell Aura there?
AURA.
Cool. And is that a free app too,
That
or do
one's
they have to
totally
pay?
free.
Cool.
It was the R&D was funded by NASA, and part of it was we were able to deliver a version of that application for kind of public interest and public education. So that one's available on Meta Horizons right now. And
And you were mentioning CME, and that was coronal mass ejection. Is that right?
correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Colloquially, we would call it a solar flare. Another interesting use case of Aura. So same platform, different use case, but again, digital assets that are going to have a time bound. And then you have sensor data coming in that has these time marks. So you need to be able to jump by time scale. We worked with another project with the US Air Force to bring in basically black box data after a flight was taken. After they land, traditionally pilots do something called a mission debrief, where they look at the flight, what maneuvers they took, when they took those maneuvers, why they took them there, and for a learning opportunity. With multi-aircraft maneuvers, debrief missions can become very long, right? You're looking at the logs, you have multiple pilots. And so what we did is we took multiple aircraft and piped it into a 3D map where you can click between the aircraft, you can see their flights, but then you can also click into an individual aircraft and you can see the pilot controls at that moment in time. This is particularly useful for training in multi-aircraft maneuvers when you have a pilot working with another pilot, and maybe the one pilot is like, yep, no, I started this maneuver right on time. You can actually look in the data and say, actually, you started it going a little bit too fast, or you started it with too high of an altitude, because you can look at what the data actually was in an individual point of time. They can also mark up the data in those sessions, and they're all co-located. So the assets are anchored so they can walk around them just as if it were physically in front of them at a conference table. It was a significant upgrade from how they do it today, which was with whiteboards and with planes on sticks.
I love that. So this is bringing me to sort of the benefits. I want to understand what you've been able to find are the benefits of spatially seeing data. You sort of alluded to it already, but I've been through a lot of hype cycles in this market. I've sat there as a lot of people have spoken very poetically about the benefits of this medium. And then I don't love those. I don't love looking back on those sort of flowery language talking about the benefits of this medium. But then in a very real way, humans have spent more than 100 years with every type of data imaginable getting compressed down onto flat screens when, everything we do is in space, is in 3D space. So we move around in 3D space, we operate machinery in 3D space. And yeah, we've got all of these flat displays and panels that reduce data down into this mass market medium that you're able to have 100 people all watch one single TV screen for like a moon landing, and
Mhm.
you're able to use this mass consumption system for really spreading out data in a really amazing way. But I come back to people like Jeff Norris, who was at NASA when I spoke to him years ago, and now he's at Apple working on the Vision Pro project. And he was talking about this idea of standing on Mars when the astronauts descend the ladder out of a lander and onto the Martian surface. And the idea that these headsets can allow us to stand right next to the astronauts and feel like we're co located with them at the moment that they're doing it. Now, of course, you and I both know that there will be a delay in the signal data. There will be a few seconds of probably processing of all that data to formulate it for your system. So it won't actually be live, but it'll be really, really close to standing there on Mars as the astronauts are going down. Between these two things, I'm wondering what holes you can fill here data wise. Where is it valuable to actually observe things in 3D or spatially that you can walk around them?
Yeah, it's such a high bar, to be honest. And the number of conversations we have with potential clients or with clients where we spend a lot of time in the conversation of why does this have to be in some medium of XR? Like it has to be very, very compelling that it's not effective on a 2D screen. Otherwise it's not worth it, frankly, because the development cost is still there, the headset cost is there, the friction that you introduce into the user experience by moving it onto a headset rather than a 2D experience. And so for us, we kind of have these core questions that lead us to like a go, no go of if we think it is worth pulling this in to an XR experience like Aura. One is safety, right? So if there is a use case by which you can make the data more securely accessible to an individual person in mixed reality, then we like that. That tends to fall more on the katana side, right? So again, it's safer for someone who is wandering around a tarmac to not be trying to lug and keep track of a bunch of literally reams and binders of paper. It's better if there is just a small monitor that's hooked up under their hard hat that they can flip down when they're ready. Keeps their hands free. Safety is a big one. If we can offer physical safety to a human in a dynamic environment by taking physical assets out of their hand, that's something that we would lean on as this is a good idea to bring it into AR. One of our other flares in that kind of go no go is the data that you are working with inherently 3D? And the answer here sometimes is a lot of data is 3D, but does it need to be best interpreted in 3D? And will you gain either efficiency or will you gain more nuanced understanding looking at it in 3D? So, a great example is like when myself and my engineering lead, as part of our research, actually sat through a demonstrative mission debrief with two Air Force pilots. The friction in their conversation as they were trying to explain a complex maneuver. They're drawing it on the whiteboard. They're moving to the physical plane so they can hold, they're using their fists in space. And then they're moving back and looking at that and then doing some initial testing. We were able to cut that part of the conversation down by anywhere from like 30 to 50%. That's a huge time savings, right? It's not, we're shaving off 5 minutes of a 3-hour conversation. We're shaving, an hour to an hour and a half off. So I think the efficiency gain is part of the conversation, but it has to be a pretty big one for it to be worth it. And I would say those are the two most common kind of go no go criteria for us is safety and efficiency. I think there's a third one that you alluded to really well with the Mars landing, which is, does it add magic to the experience in a way that genuinely enriches the user experience in a way that helps them do their job better or feel more connected to their work. And that one is a little bit harder, but I love that you brought it up because
Mm.
it's bringing me back to a different project we worked on with Katana, which actually was for language learning application. We got to work with a phenomenal researcher called Dr. Sarah Smith out of University of Florida. And she really talks about the difference between seeing the word for bread in Spanish on a flashcard and how many times you would need to see it in order to actually be able to recall it versus sitting in a plaza in Madrid, Spain, and being handed bread by a waiter as they say the word, and how we already know from decades of learning research that you are looking at anywhere of a third to half of the time to be able to recall that word if the richness of your experience is really, really high versus if the richness of experience is really, really low. So again, comparing the Plaza experience to the note card. And that one is so much harder for us to quantify, but it is like a set of criteria that does come up often in these conversations when we're talking about does this belong in XR or not.
That is really, really interesting. I love the way you call it magic because it kind of alludes to the idea that it exists in an area that's kind of hard to measure. It's maybe hard to quantify ROI or return on investment there for users. You mentioned all of the things that are clear barriers here. But the reason so many people have kind of turned away from this medium, the headset is a pain to put on. It's heavy. But when there's magic in the air, so to speak, it kind of erases a lot of those concerns for a bunch of people. I saw this at the jigsaw puzzling event. I think I've already brought this up on my podcast already once, but I'll keep bringing it up because it was such a powerful moment for me to observe this. But there was a mother and daughter experiencing a headset for the first time, both of them. And they'd been jigsaw puzzling their entire lives. They love jigsaw puzzling, and they're at this event to do speed puzzling, which means they're gonna hunch themselves over a table and be there for maybe an hour and a half. And the whole time they're hunched over trying to put little pieces inside of a puzzle. So like that's a lot of strain on the body to be seated, to be hunched over, to be doing this activity where you're looking down. And then they go and put this heavy Quest 3S headset on, and it's actually an enormous relief to them to get up off their butts, to walk around the space, and to just feel like I needed a stretch. This headset was actually a reminder to me that I needed to stretch after doing this whole activity that I love, which is jigsaw puzzling. But I needed sort of this other thing to kind of give me the magic to get up off my butt and walk around and hang out with my mom and my daughter, do this activity that I love in a whole new way. And that 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 feedback, what hearing from those people was just such a powerful reinforcement that like it's really easy to dismiss this medium, this technology, because of things like what was it, Neil Stevenson a couple weeks ago saying that people go through a ton of effort to make their faces look good, and that's actually going to keep this medium from finding mainstream success. And it feels like he's glossing over, Neil Stevenson being a former Magic Leap employee, glossing over all these things that we've seen actually proof of concepts of in that are really powerful, like the persona avatars inside Vision Pro, the codec avatars that are coming from the Meta ecosystem, where you just scan yourself once and maybe you, I keep wondering about this, if this is going to happen sometime in the future where you're going out to the salon and getting your hair cut, getting your makeup done perfectly, shaving perfectly, and then scanning yourself at that exact moment for the headset to make yourself look at your absolute best. And now you don't have to kind of do that for another 6 months or 9 months and just enjoy this avatar that represents you as you actually want to appear on most of your calls. So I feel like there's so many, it's like you see what you want in this medium. So to speak. Maybe you lost a job and now you're down on this medium and thinking that it's not going to succeed. Then I see people like these creators that I follow for a good virtual reality. There are people that have been at this for a decade, and that magic never leaves them. That first magic that they felt on day one, the magic that they feel the moment they get a project up and running, and they feel that magic again. And kind of like just this belief in their heart that the price is going to come down, the quality is going to go up. Things like you've mentioned on this podcast of flipping the display up out of your eyes at the moment's notice, those things will get engineered into future HMDs so that people can have that quick switch system. So, is there anything you want to respond to on that big section before I ask my next question?
Yeah. No, I love that you appreciated the term magic and that you understand what I mean by it because it is I don't have a better word to describe that facet of why sometimes this medium just beats other ones. But something you said that I found quite interesting is you talked about the friction that the headset introduces, right? It maybe messes up your hair or whatever, and how you can flip that script and say, oh, yeah, but you could also scan your hair on your best hair day. Something that I have thought about a lot and talked about a lot with people on my team is that friction is not always a bad thing, that there are many things in our life and in our interaction with technology where friction is there intentionally. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to push for lighter weight headsets that are more comfortable for longer periods of time, that are more accessible to people with color vision differences or things like that. But it does mean that just because the medium has more friction than, say, your cell phone, does not mean that the medium as a whole is unsuccessful. And you talked a little bit about, success and people coming down on the medium and saying, oh, this isn't going to work. And, I kind of have a joke with my co-founder that we never make it more than 2 days into the year before we read, "Oh, this is the year that that VR is dead," and we're still here, almost 10 years later, so the prior years haven't been right because we're still here building for real use cases and real people. So sometimes I think success in VR gets confused with, like, proliferation of the medium, that there's this perception that anything short of, the vision laid out in Ready Player One is not successful.
Yeah.
And I don't buy that. I think there are many forms of technology that can be used by all ages, by all demographics, in all types of jobs. And then there are other forms of technology that are more niche. And that doesn't mean that they aren't useful. It does maybe have implications for how quickly things will progress because that will follow investment, the potential size of the market. But I don't know. Maybe I'm an optimist because this is what I do, but I truly believe that there are very real use cases where the magic is there, the usefulness is there, the safety improvement is there, and therefore the technology still has a place.
Mm.
Whether or not that place is what certain people thought it would be is another thing entirely. But I meet people every day, and I did at that conference where I'll be honest, I did not think I love jigsaw puzzles. It honestly never occurred to me that the puzzling experience could be better in a in a headset than in real life. And I don't know that I would say that it was better, but it was different. As someone who has very young kids, I don't puzzle very often because they steal the pieces. And I don't have that problem with Chicks on Night, which I love. Again, there's a time and a place for it. And is that time and place everywhere and everything? No, but that does not mean that the technology doesn't have, a place in the larger ecosystem.
I love that. Yeah. So I had one of the founders of Gravity Sketch on one of my last podcasts, and he talked about needing patience, have patience and focus. But patience was the word that really stuck out to me. He mentioned like saying no to a lot of things in order to get to where you are, but also just this idea of taking time of making sure that you kind of wait for it to be ready. And he's doing that project is doing enormous work. People that uh, depend on Gravity Sketch to build products both digitally and physically. It's quite astounding how useful it is. I love so much of what you're saying about a time and a place for it. The other thing that he said was that really stuck with me, and it's going to come up, I think, a lot in the future as I continue on more conversations with more people, is that the headset doesn't really replace any existing technology. The keyboard replaced a typewriter, and he went through all these other examples, like the iPhone or the phone replaced a phone, the old type of phone. And we went through this whole giant period of, gosh, 15 years there where we're calling smartphones smartphones to differentiate them from the dumb phones. And then we're calling the old phones dumb phones because the smartphones are so popular that they're passing over to mainstream acceptance. But then you have these headsets that don't have any previous analogs. So you're really pushing against having to change behaviors on a scale that no one really expected. At the outset of this market, I'm as guilty as anyone. There was something else you also mentioned there of this is the year VR is dead. And I love that because the flip of that is 2012, I'm going to interview. I did my first demo of Oculus, and then I interview USC and Stanford, professors at both of those schools working on VR there. And I believe it was Stanford there that joked with me that every year in the VR industry, some scientist says this is the year that VR takes off. And this was a joke in 2012. And now we're 2026. And now it's just the flip is a joke, right? It's the flip is that this is the year VR died. And at the all of it, like when you look at a lot of these things, Meta has carried a lot of weight for this industry, right? Invested an extraordinary amount. They've been the biggest proponents of this technology. They had a vision. But the thing that I have to kind of remind regular listeners of this podcast and other people is, Mark Zuckerberg didn't invent virtual reality. He didn't. He showed up one day to Oculus headquarters and enjoyed a room that was made by Valve software and given to Oculus to spread this knowledge. And then he very quickly did a tour of other experts in the space. I think he went to Stanford and talked to them. And then he came back from his tour of all these places and said, "Okay, given that all of I'm paraphrasing here. He didn't act. I don't know what he said, but given his actions, basically what I understand he did is kinda, like, saw that Valve is investing this, saw that, other people are sniffing around this technology, and then swiped up the most exciting startup in the market to try to bootstrap this idea for himself. And that's made, what Meta does, this lightning rod of you can everything you ever want to complain about Meta having ever done to you or Facebook being involved in whatever situation going on in your personal life just because it's the social network that connects you to everyone else, you get to like sort of whip them for the failure of VR or the failure to be right that this is the year that they're able to take it off. There's a couple technologies that I'm trying to get more specific with this. I'm being very broad in my talk with you, but eye tracking. There was a period where I thought the Oculus Go for 200 bucks was the first mainstream headset. And then every moment I used that headset, I regretted it because I couldn't lean around. And it was a learning experience for Facebook that sixed off tracking, the ability to lean around and even have micro movements where you're just shifting in your seat and have that reflected in your VR experience were absolutely necessary. That no one really wants to experience reality without those things present. And I'm starting to think that eye tracking is one of these other technologies that, with the Quest 3S sort of failing to succeed, the Quest 3 only reaching a certain market size, it's as if Meta has realized that they need more hardware. They need these headsets to be doing more things than they currently do in order for it to be really compelling. And I'm starting to think eye tracking is going to be a necessary feature in all future devices just because of the benefits that you get on the other side of tracking where your eye is located. You can have really great aerospace simulations. I'm looking at what Apple's doing with Vision Pro right now, where they've got foveated streaming, and then there's also the Steam frame that has eye tracking built in, and they're going to have the same idea where they're going to pass along what your eye is looking at to the rendering engine on a really powerful PC there, and you're going to be able to, in very short order here, have a, I don't know, a $4 or $5,000 cockpit setup at home and have your actual hands represented in front of you, reaching out to these physical controls that are in front of you and turning dials, pulling levers, and a real joystick. And you look out your window and you've got this incredibly detailed skyline that's being rendered on a very powerful PC nearby or Mac nearby, and it's being combined with maybe digital content that's being shown in your cockpit, as well as the physical environment that's surrounding you. So maybe you don't have the physical cockpit, you've got a digital cockpit, and maybe you've also got the more expensive physical setup. But at the end of all of this, you have a system that used to cost $100,000 or $1 million now being reduced to the thousands of dollars. You're talking 5,000 or 3,000. And is it the $300 system that Meta just launched? No, right? There was some discovery here that $300, you can't really force this much, needs of reality into a device that takes that many things away from you. So I want to come back to some broader questions here with you. I think we've covered a bunch of your work in aerospace and with Dauntless, and I want to just have some fun questions here. Of just when you're not working or thinking about how to make money out of VR, do you enjoy VR or AR? And can you call out any specific experiences that you really enjoy?
Yeah, no, that's a I mean, I do. I think it would've been very difficult for me to have been working on this for so long and not just, like, enjoy the medium. I will say, um, unlike many people that I interact with in this community, I am not a gamer by nature, and don't spend as much time in that. So, some of my favorite applications are maybe slightly less interesting. Like, I do love YouTube VR because that's a great one. When it does come to gaming, I do still love Tetris. It's very comfortable. Look, you can like recline on your couch. The settings are very serene. It's a beautifully designed app from like a sound and haptics perspective. And like that's one that I find myself coming back to quite often, to be honest. And I do
Tetris Effect connected? Are you talking
yeah,
about that
Tetris
specific one? Yeah.
effect. Yeah, exactly. It's a delight to play, in my
Uh,
opinion. It's a
you're
I
speaking
just
my language there. That was I was in the back seat of my parents' car eating AA batteries inside the Game Boy with Tetris for years there, and man, if you get really good at Tetris, you feel like a god
yeah.
when the pieces are all you're planning where the next piece goes before the first piece falls. It's like nothing can stop me from being this good at placing the lines exactly where they need to be. And if you haven't tried it yet, there's Retrocade on the Apple Vision Pro, and they've been doing something really cool there. With you need an Apple Arcade subscription, but they've been dropping new games into this sort of retro arcade, and you can get the full cabinet. But they've basically reimagined, like, I've seen these ideas tried before. So Oculus Arcade came out,
Mhm.
I don't know, last decade sometime, and they had the arcade experience mapped out where it still had all of these problems that we've already talked about here, where it's not sixed off, you can't lean around. Well, here's Apple trying to do their version of it, and I keep trying to tell more people about this because it feels so right to me. You go in there and they give you the immersion of like a 1989 arcade where just these bright, sort of warm lights. You look around, you hear the music and all the arcade cabinet sounds all around you. The arcade is all you're all alone in the arcade. You've got it all to yourself. Um, and then you can bring up the games floating in front of you with all the comfort of being able to lean around, or just kill the arcade environment and take the environment, show your room. And so now the arcade screen alone is floating in front of you. But they've done like little details here where you can see that they've taken the light of the screen and have it reflecting off of the sides of the cabinet. And so even though you've brought the screen out, there's still light reflecting off of this virtual screen on a virtual cabinet that is just slightly framing your content there. But you go back into that arcade and you look, you point your eyes at a light in the corner of the room and then click a button on your controller and it accesses a secret back room of the arcade where they have this old system set up there and it boots up the original version of Tetris with
I
like
love this.
Russian characters up there on the screen. And there you are playing original Tetris in this hidden back room of this arcade. And it just like it's not Ready Player One. It's not what we saw in Spielberg's rendition of it. It's not what we saw in Ernest Cline's book rendition of it, but by golly, it was comfortable, right? I teleported back into that room and I'm standing up now because it's like, oh, wow, they went through some effort here to bring Tetris back to life and give me this immersion. Wow, I just needed to give all of that context to my listeners out there because you got me going on Tetris. That is my favorite game as well.
I love that. I need to go try this. And, so maybe it wasn't Ready Player One, but you know what they did from your description, what they did capture, um, that I think was a core part of that story is just the joy of an Easter egg and the delight at just like, uh, I don't know, really enjoying something that a developer did
Oh,
just for you, right?
yes. Yes, you're right. Gosh, I mean,
Back to our magic.
yes, Easter eggs. Walkabout Mini Golf. Have you ever played Walkabout Mini Golf?
No.
Oh, all right. So Walkabout Mini Golf, all my listeners might be rolling their eyes because I talk about it so much. But it's this game that came out in 2020. It's they've made some really smart decisions in the development of it. Where you only use one controller, you don't have to use both controllers, and it just you press one button on it and you teleport to your ball anywhere you are, so you get lost in this realm and you just press your button and you're back at your ball ready to golf again. And one thing they've done is they start rolling out new courses every few months. And a developer goes in and hides a hidden ball at every hole of an 18-hole golf course. And so while you're golfing and hitting balls and trying to get them into a mini golf course in VR, you're also kind of keeping your eye out for a ball that might be hidden in the landscape. And you just go over to the ball when you spot one and press a little button and it suctions up the ball and it becomes part of your collection. But
Cool.
I went in there with my kid and it very quickly the game became no longer uh we were no longer golfing, we were doing Easter egg hunt. And I
I love that.
we started talking about aerospace and the value of saving lives and saving money here. But we've both zeroed in here on a design technique that I would love to see more devs use of just surprise and delight your audience with Easter eggs like this that get them going and give them a layer of the experience that they haven't really had. All right. So I think we've covered most of what I wanted to cover today. Is there anything else about Dauntless and about your work in XR that you want people to know?
That's a great question. I would say the the last thing that um I would mention is that there are a lot of interesting applications out there where XR as a medium is a component of the experience and not the whole experience. And our apps right now very much focus on where like XR is the whole experience. It's the whole point of it. This is data that needs to be perceived in XR. These are work instructions that need to be made accessible hands free. And what I am really excited about and what I hope to see more of, particularly in the AR space, is like smart glasses and things like that become more available is aspects and applications where XR is just a component of the medium and of the full application experience and not the whole thing. But I think, at least for us, we've always been building with this dividing line of does it belong in XR or not? And that kind of the biggest shift that we're having internally now is maybe does a piece of this belong in XR? And can we accomplish the rest of the application through some other medium? With mobile or with 2D, and is blurring that line going to help the industry continue to move forward in making this medium useful in more places?
Oh, I love that. I'll do a shout out here to Steve Lucas again. We've already referred to his Jigsaw Night multiple times here, but he showed me this technology that kind of hints at what you're talking about there. I think it's a dual render fusion, and it was this idea that you could you could add a camera to your virtual component, your Unity project, very easily, and it would extend the experience from a phone app to a headset or glasses in a very effortless way. But it's tugging at, exactly what you're talking about there, that you don't kind of need necessarily the all-encompassing experience, even to just get some benefits from wearing a headset, even though there's all the other things that we talked about here that are friction points that you have to get right. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure here. But it was a really interesting idea that would make it much easier for devs to touch their toes into the waters of XR without having to dive in or rebuild everything from scratch all at once. It would be speaks to that project in particular speaks a lot to what you're talking about here. Well, I love this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me, Sophia. You can find more about Dauntless at dauntlessxr.com. And what was the name of that application that people can find on the Quest store one more time?
Aura Space Weather Data Explorer. We also have a
Awesome.
free version of Katana on the Quest store as well.
Awesome. And I'll do a shout out for Titans of Space. If you've never tried of Space, please give that a try. That's my favorite space exploration app. And I just wanted to shout that one out before we
Will do.
close off today. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.